Everyone in Maple Ridge believed Ethan Cole was the perfect husband. He coached children's baseball, smiled at every neighbor, and never missed a family event. But behind the spotless image and cheerful family photos was a terrifying secret no one could see coming. Then, one cold October morning, police cars surrounded his beautiful suburban home, and the truth that emerged shocked the entire country. Investigators soon uncovered hidden debt, emotional control, carefully buried lies, and a darkness that had been growing inside the perfect family for years. What really happened inside that house? And how did the man everyone trusted become the center of one of the most disturbing family crime cases the town had ever seen? Ethan Cole was the kind of man neighbors trusted instantly. In the quiet suburban town of Maple Ridge, Ohio, he waved at every passing car, volunteered at local charity events, and spent weekends coaching Little League baseball. To outsiders, his life looked almost unreal in its perfection. He lived in a large two-story home with his wife, Melissa, and their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. Family photos lined the walls of their home, each one showing smiling faces, warm holidays, and what appeared to be a close and loving family. Ethan worked as a financial consultant at a respected company downtown, while Melissa ran a small online craft business from home. Friends described them as calm, successful, and deeply connected. But behind the polished image, something much darker had quietly begun growing inside Ethan's mind. For years, he had carefully hidden his controlling behavior beneath charm and politeness. He disliked when Melissa spent time with friends without telling him first. He monitored small details, questioned innocent purchases, and became irritated whenever life did not follow the exact order he expected. Melissa dismissed many of these warning signs because Ethan never exploded in public. Instead, his anger arrived in silence, cold stares, and long periods of emotional distance that made the house feel heavy and uncomfortable. As the years passed, Ethan's financial situation began collapsing in secret. Unknown to Melissa, he had made several risky investments that failed badly, leaving him buried under enormous debt. Bills piled up in hidden drawers inside his office. He lied about work bonuses, secretly borrowed money, and manipulated bank records to maintain the illusion of stability. The pressure slowly changed him. He stopped laughing at family dinners. He stayed awake late into the night staring at spreadsheets on his laptop while Melissa slept upstairs with Sophie. His co-workers noticed he had become distracted and irritable, but Ethan always blamed stress and exhaustion. At home, Melissa started asking questions about missing savings and unpaid expenses. She noticed strange withdrawals from shared accounts and confronted him one evening after Sophie had gone to bed. Ethan calmly denied everything at first, but Melissa no longer believed him. For the first time in their marriage, she mentioned the possibility of separating until he became honest with her. Those words shattered the perfect image Ethan had spent years building. The fear of losing his reputation became stronger than his fear of losing his family itself. Over the next several weeks, Ethan became obsessed with maintaining control. He carefully studied Melissa's routines and listened closely to her phone conversations. Melissa secretly spoke with a lawyer and confided in a close friend that she no longer felt emotionally safe inside the marriage. She planned to leave quietly after gathering enough information about Ethan's hidden debts. Meanwhile, Ethan acted unusually calm. He brought flowers home unexpectedly, organized a family movie night, and even suggested taking a weekend trip together. Melissa found his behavior confusing because it felt artificial, almost rehearsed. Sophie, too young to understand the tension, remained cheerful and excited whenever her father paid extra attention to her. Ethan used these moments to strengthen the image everyone around them already believed: devoted husband, loving father, perfect family man. But beneath that carefully rehearsed smile, his thoughts had become increasingly dangerous. He convinced himself that if Melissa exposed the truth, everything he had built would collapse forever. The house, his career, his reputation, and the admiration of everyone around him would disappear in an instant. One rainy Thursday evening in October, Melissa visited a local cafe to meet privately with her lawyer. She discussed temporary custody arrangements, financial concerns, and plans to move with Sophie to her sister's home in another state. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan had followed her there. Sitting inside his parked car across the street, he watched through the rain-covered windshield as Melissa handed over folders filled with financial records. In that moment, something inside him seemed to completely unravel. Witnesses later remembered Ethan returning home that night appearing strangely emotionless. A neighbor saw him standing alone in the backyard for nearly an hour despite the cold weather, staring toward the dark woods behind the neighborhood. Inside the house, Melissa tucked Sophie into bed and spent the rest of the evening in silence. Ethan barely spoke during dinner, answering questions with short replies while keeping his eyes fixed on the television. The tension inside the home had become impossible to ignore. Around midnight, Melissa awoke after hearing footsteps downstairs. She found Ethan sitting alone in the kitchen with papers scattered across the table. Financial statements, overdue notices, and legal documents covered every surface. Ethan looked exhausted, almost hollow. Melissa quietly sat across from him and told him the truth. She said she planned to leave within days and wanted the separation handled peacefully for Sophie's sake. At first, Ethan said nothing. Then he began speaking softly about betrayal, humiliation, and the destruction of their family. Melissa tried calming him, reminding him that problems could still be solved over time. But Ethan no longer seemed focused on solutions. His words became colder, more detached, as if he had already accepted a terrible conclusion. That conversation would become the final moment anyone ever saw the family together in public life. The next morning, the neighborhood awoke to flashing police lights surrounding the Cole family home. Ethan stood outside wrapped in a blanket, speaking quietly with investigators while rain continued falling across the empty street. He told officers he had discovered a horrifying scene after waking up unexpectedly during the night. His voice sounded controlled, almost too controlled. Detectives immediately noticed unusual details inside the house. Nothing appeared forced open. Valuable items remained untouched. Family photographs still sat neatly on shelves. Yet the atmosphere inside felt deeply unsettling, as though something terrible had happened behind carefully arranged silence. News spread rapidly across Maple Ridge. Residents could not comprehend how tragedy had entered the home of the town's seemingly perfect family. Reporters gathered outside police barriers while neighbors whispered in disbelief. Everyone asked the same question again and again: how could a man, who appeared so kind and devoted, become connected to something so horrifying? Investigators soon began uncovering hidden truths beneath Ethan Cole's carefully crafted image. The massive financial deception, Melissa's planned separation, and Ethan's desperate fear of public humiliation slowly emerged piece by piece. Detectives studying security footage, financial records, and witness statements realized the story Ethan told did not fully match the evidence they were finding. As the investigation deepened, authorities started suspecting that the tragedy inside the Cole home had not been the result of sudden chaos at all, but something far more calculated. And while the town still struggled to understand the nightmare unfolding before them, Ethan maintained the same calm expression he had shown everyone for years. The expression of a man determined to appear perfect no matter what darkness hid beneath the surface. The investigation into the Cole family tragedy quickly transformed from a heartbreaking local case into the center of national attention. Reporters camped outside the Maple Ridge Police Department day and night while television helicopters circled above the quiet suburban streets, where children once rode bicycles and families held summer barbecues. Residents who had known Ethan for years struggled to connect the polite, soft-spoken man they remembered with the growing suspicions surrounding him. Some defended him passionately, insisting there had to be another explanation. Others began recalling strange moments they had ignored in the past, the way Ethan controlled conversations, how Melissa sometimes appeared nervous during social gatherings, or how Ethan became unusually tense whenever finances were discussed. Investigators, meanwhile, worked carefully behind closed doors, assembling a timeline that slowly revealed the collapse of the family's carefully constructed life. Inside Ethan's home office, detectives discovered hidden folders containing years of financial deception. There were unpaid loans, forged signatures, and records showing Ethan had secretly moved money between accounts to hide enormous losses. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer it became that Ethan's financial situation had become catastrophic. He owed more money than anyone in town could have imagined, and several legal notices showed he was close to losing nearly everything he owned. Detectives also recovered deleted messages from Ethan's computer revealing frantic conversations with creditors demanding immediate payments. In one message sent only days before the tragedy, Ethan wrote that his entire life would be destroyed if the truth became public. Investigators believed this growing panic played a major role in the horrifying events that followed. Melissa's side of the story also began emerging through interviews with friends and family members. Her younger sister, Rachel, told investigators that Melissa had become deeply unhappy during the final months of her marriage. According to Rachel, Melissa no longer trusted Ethan and feared his behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable. She described late-night phone calls where Melissa cried quietly, explaining that Ethan constantly monitored her movements and reacted coldly whenever she questioned his financial decisions. Melissa had reportedly started keeping important documents hidden inside a small storage unit across town, because she worried Ethan might destroy them if he discovered she planned to leave. Friends also revealed Melissa had recently spoken about creating a safer and more peaceful life for Sophie away from the tension inside their home. These details painted a disturbing picture of a marriage quietly collapsing beneath years of emotional pressure. As detectives reconstructed Ethan's movements during the final days before the tragedy, they uncovered evidence suggesting careful preparation rather than sudden panic. Security cameras from nearby stores showed Ethan purchasing cleaning supplies, disposable gloves, and several household items investigators considered highly suspicious given the timing. Surveillance footage also captured him driving aimlessly through isolated roads outside town late at night during the week before the incident. Detectives believed Ethan may have been rehearsing possibilities inside his mind long before the horrifying events occurred. What frightened investigators most was how calm Ethan appeared throughout the entire period. Co-workers remembered him attending meetings normally, smiling during conversations, and casually discussing future vacation plans only hours before everything changed forever. The police interrogation of Ethan Cole became one of the most chilling moments in the investigation. Detectives described him as emotionally detached, almost robotic in the way he answered questions. He spoke slowly, maintained steady eye contact, and rarely showed visible emotion even when discussing Melissa and Sophie. When investigators asked about his failing finances, Ethan admitted to hiding debts, but insisted he had been trying to protect his family from stress. However, detectives noticed subtle contradictions in his timeline. Certain details changed each time he repeated the story. He struggled to explain missing hours during the night investigators believed the tragedy occurred. More troubling still, forensic evidence inside the home failed to support several of Ethan's claims about what supposedly happened. Investigators increasingly believed Ethan had staged portions of the scene in an attempt to mislead authorities and preserve his innocent image. While investigators worked behind the scenes, public fascination with the case exploded online and across news networks. Former classmates, neighbors, and co-workers gave interviews describing Ethan as too perfect, saying his kindness sometimes felt rehearsed rather than genuine. Reporters uncovered old social media posts where Ethan constantly portrayed his family as flawless and happy. Every holiday photo, anniversary message, and smiling vacation picture suddenly appeared unsettling in hindsight. Experts discussing the case on television explained how some individuals become dangerously obsessed with maintaining public appearances, especially when facing humiliation, financial collapse, or loss of control. To many observers, Ethan no longer looked like the devoted husband from the photographs. Instead, he appeared like a man desperately performing a role, while his real life disintegrated behind closed doors. Then investigators uncovered the evidence that completely changed the direction of the case. A neighbor's security camera, previously overlooked due to heavy rain and poor visibility, captured movement outside the Cole home during the early morning hours. Though the footage was blurry, detectives identified Ethan carrying several large bags from the house to his vehicle long before emergency services were contacted. More importantly, timestamp analysis showed Ethan waited nearly 2 hours before calling authorities. Investigators believed those missing hours were spent cleaning, rearranging the scene, and creating the version of events he would later describe to police. Forensic teams also found traces of cleaned biological evidence in areas Ethan claimed he had never entered that night. Combined with digital records showing internet searches related to financial fraud investigations and life insurance policies, the evidence against him became overwhelming. When Ethan was finally brought back in for a second extended interrogation, detectives confronted him with the contradictions directly. Witnesses later described the atmosphere inside the interrogation room as tense and deeply unsettling. For hours Ethan denied involvement, repeating the same carefully measured responses. But as investigators presented more evidence piece by piece, cracks slowly began appearing in his calm exterior. His breathing became uneven. He stopped maintaining eye contact. At one point he reportedly sat silently for nearly 10 minutes staring at the table without speaking. Detectives believed he realized the perfect image he had spent years building was finally collapsing beyond repair. Yet even then, Ethan never displayed the emotional breakdown many expected. Instead, he appeared exhausted, almost relieved that the exhausting performance was ending. Outside the police station, Maple Ridge remained frozen in shock. Parents held their children closer. Families who once admired Ethan and Melissa struggled with guilt for missing warning signs hidden behind smiles and neighborhood gatherings. Candlelight memorials filled the sidewalks near the Cole family home, as residents mourned the devastating loss of Melissa and Sophie. But alongside grief came fear that someone capable of hiding such darkness could live among them unnoticed for years. Investigators now believed Ethan's obsession with reputation, control, and appearances had slowly consumed him until preserving his image became more important than the people closest to him. And as prosecutors prepared to formally charge Ethan Cole, the town realized the nightmare was far from over. The upcoming trial would expose even darker truths about what had really been happening inside the perfect family home all along. The trial of Ethan Cole began nearly 11 months after the tragedy that shattered Maple Ridge, and by the first morning, crowds had already formed outside the courthouse before sunrise. News vans lined the streets while reporters described the case as one of the most disturbing family betrayal stories the state had ever seen. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavy and emotionally drained long before proceedings even started. Melissa's relatives sat silently in the front row clutching framed photographs of her and Sophie, while Ethan entered wearing a dark suit, with the same controlled expression he had maintained since the investigation began. Many people watching expected him to finally show visible emotion during the trial, but Ethan remained eerily composed. He rarely looked toward the gallery and spent most of the proceedings staring straight ahead, almost detached from the devastating reality unfolding around him. Prosecutors opened the case by describing Ethan not as a man who suddenly lost control in a moment of panic, but as someone who spent months constructing a false version of himself while secretly drowning in financial collapse and emotional instability. They argued that Ethan's obsession with maintaining the image of the perfect family became so extreme that he viewed Melissa's planned departure as the complete destruction of his identity. According to prosecutors, Ethan believed exposure would ruin his career, humiliate him publicly, and reveal years of deception he had hidden from everyone around him. They explained how investigators uncovered evidence showing Ethan carefully manipulated bank records, lied repeatedly to Melissa, and secretly monitored her attempts to prepare for separation. Prosecutors told the jury that the tragedy was not born from confusion or temporary anger, but from a calculated fear of losing control over the life he had spent years manufacturing. Over the following weeks, the courtroom heard deeply emotional testimony from dozens of witnesses who described the hidden tension inside the Cole household. Melissa's closest friend testified that Melissa often sounded emotionally exhausted during late-night conversations. She described Melissa as someone who spent years trying to preserve peace inside the home, while quietly carrying growing fear and anxiety. According to her testimony, Melissa worried constantly about Ethan's reactions whenever she questioned him about money or future plans. She explained that Melissa had started documenting financial irregularities because she believed Ethan was hiding something serious. The courtroom became silent as jurors listened to portions of Melissa's journal entries recovered during the investigation. In those writings, Melissa described feeling as though she was walking carefully around someone becoming emotionally unrecognizable. She wrote about Ethan's cold silences, his intense need for control, and her growing desire to leave before the situation worsened further. Financial experts later took the stand and revealed the staggering extent of Ethan's hidden debt. Detailed charts displayed massive losses from failed investments, unpaid personal loans, and falsified financial reports. Prosecutors demonstrated how Ethan spent years moving money between accounts to maintain the appearance of success. By the final months before the tragedy, he was reportedly facing complete financial ruin. Witnesses from Ethan's workplace testified that he had recently become withdrawn and distracted, though he continued pretending everything was normal during meetings and public events. One co-worker recalled Ethan smiling through presentations during the day, then sitting alone in his office long after everyone else had left. Another witness described hearing Ethan once say, "If people knew the truth about me, everything would disappear overnight." Those words echoed heavily through the courtroom as prosecutors argued that Ethan's greatest fear was not losing money, but losing the carefully crafted identity he had built around appearing successful and respected. Perhaps the most unsettling testimony came from forensic investigators, who explained the evidence recovered inside the Cole home. Experts described signs of staged activity within the house, including clean surfaces, rearranged objects, and inconsistencies between Ethan's statements and the physical evidence. Prosecutors presented the neighborhood surveillance footage showing Ethan moving through the property during the early morning hours before contacting authorities. Though blurry, the footage became one of the trial's most powerful moments because it directly contradicted Ethan's original timeline. Investigators testified that Ethan delayed calling emergency services while attempting to manipulate the scene and create confusion about what had occurred. Jurors listened closely as forensic analysts explained how digital evidence also showed internet searches related to financial investigations, reputation damage, and insurance policies during the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Prosecutors argued these searches reflected Ethan's growing desperation and obsession with protecting himself from public disgrace. Ethan's defense team attempted to portray him as a mentally overwhelmed man crushed by financial stress, emotional pressure, and fear of losing his family. They argued that the mounting debt and collapse of his marriage caused severe psychological deterioration that distorted his judgment. Defense attorneys pointed out that Ethan had no violent criminal history and had spent years appearing to be a caring father and husband. Several former friends testified that Ethan once seemed gentle, patient, and deeply devoted to Sophie. But prosecutors countered by arguing that appearances were exactly what Ethan cared about most. They insisted his calm personality and public kindness were part of the image he carefully protected while privately becoming increasingly controlling and emotionally detached. The prosecution repeatedly returned to one central argument: Ethan did not simply fear losing his family, he feared losing ownership over the perfect image he believed defined him. As the trial continued, the emotional toll on the community became impossible to ignore. Maple Ridge residents packed the courtroom nearly every day, many struggling to process how someone they had trusted for years could allegedly hide such darkness. Local businesses displayed memorial photographs of Melissa and Sophie near cash registers and windows. Schools organized counseling sessions for children shaken by the constant media coverage surrounding the case. Parents spoke openly about how the tragedy changed the way they viewed relationships and warning signs within families. Some residents admitted they now questioned whether they truly knew the people living around them. The case had transformed from a criminal investigation into something far larger, a painful reflection on hidden emotional abuse, public appearances, and the dangerous pressure some people place on maintaining an illusion of perfection. After nearly 2 months of testimony, the trial reached its final stage. Prosecutors delivered a closing argument that left the courtroom completely silent. They described Ethan as a man who built his entire identity around control, image, and admiration. When Melissa prepared to leave and expose the truth about his financial lies, prosecutors argued, Ethan chose the unthinkable rather than face humiliation and collapse. They reminded jurors about the carefully hidden debts, the staged evidence, the delayed emergency call, and the surveillance footage contradicting his story. This case, the lead prosecutor said quietly, is about what happens when someone values appearance more than human life. Across the courtroom, Melissa's family wept silently while Ethan sat motionless, his expression unreadable. The jury deliberated for 3 long days. Outside the courthouse, national media outlets broadcast non-stop updates, while Maple Ridge residents gathered anxiously nearby waiting for the verdict. When jurors finally returned to the courtroom, the tension became almost unbearable. Ethan stood slowly as the foreperson prepared to read the decision. For the first time since the investigation began, observers noticed a visible crack in Ethan's calm demeanor. His hands trembled slightly while the verdict was announced. Gasps and quiet sobs filled the courtroom as jurors confirmed what investigators had believed for months. The seemingly perfect husband and father who spent years fooling everyone around him was responsible for the horrifying destruction of his own family. But even after the verdict, the story left behind questions that haunted Maple Ridge for years afterward. People continued wondering how long Ethan's darkness had truly existed beneath the surface, and whether the warning signs could have been recognized sooner. Experts later studied the case as a chilling example of hidden emotional control, image obsession, and private psychological collapse concealed behind public charm. The beautiful family photographs that once represented happiness became symbols of how appearances can hide devastating truths. And in the quiet suburban neighborhood where the Cole family once seemed to have everything, residents never again looked at perfect families quite the same way.